My executive wife cheated because I was just a mechanic. But when I discovered her affair, I secretly bought the shop, and the judge left her with nothing while her lover abandoned her. I'm 32 years old. I'm a mechanic. Well, I was just a mechanic when all this started. And I need to tell this story because, honestly, I still can't believe how it all ended. About a year and a half ago, my marriage exploded in the most spectacular way possible. And when I say spectacular, I mean it ended in a courtroom with my ex-wife's face turning every shade of red, while the judge basically destroyed all her lies. But I'm going to start from the beginning, because otherwise none of this makes sense. I met Melissa about 6 years ago when she brought her car to the shop where I worked. She had a BMW that was making weird noises, and she was all stressed out because she had to get to some important presentation. You know, one of those corporate marketing things I never fully understood. I was the only mechanic available that day, and I told her I could check it out quick. Turns out it was something simple, like a belt that needed adjustment, and I fixed it in 20 minutes. She was surprised, I think, because she expected me to tell her she needed like $1,000 in repairs or something. I charged her fairly, and she gave me her number, supposedly to recommend me to her friends if they needed an honest mechanic. 2 days later, she called to invite me for coffee. I'm not going to lie. At first it seemed weird to me. She was a marketing executive, dressed in expensive suits, drove that BMW, and I was a mechanic who smelled like motor oil most of the time and drove a 2010 pickup. But the thing is, on the first few dates she seemed, I don't know, like fascinated with my work. She asked me questions about how engines worked, said she thought it was incredible that I could diagnose problems just by listening to a car. I thought, well, this woman is different. She doesn't care that I don't have a college degree or an office job. How naive I was. Honestly, we dated for 2 years before getting married. During that time, everything seemed perfect. I mean, we had our obvious differences, but I thought we complemented each other well. She was all organized and planned out. I was more relaxed and practical. My sister Victoria never liked her. That's for sure. From day one, she told me, "Jacob, that woman sees you as a project, not as a partner." But I didn't listen, because I was, I guess, in love or whatever that was. When we got married, I was 26 and she was 28. We decided to buy a house, nothing fancy but decent, in a quiet neighborhood. The problem was my credit wasn't enough for the full loan, so Melissa's brother, Samuel, offered to co-sign. Samuel was a real estate developer, had money, and at the time I thought it was generous of him. Melissa convinced me, saying it was temporary, that in a year we'd refinance and take him off the loan. I should have seen the red flag there. But well, I was already in. The first 2 years of marriage were, let's say, normal. I worked at the shop Monday through Saturday, sometimes until late because my boss, a guy about 65 who'd had that business for decades, depended on me a lot. Melissa worked her office hours, we went out on Sundays, watched shows at night, the usual. But then she got a big promotion at her company, became senior manager or something like that, and things started to change. First came the subtle comments. Things like, "I don't understand why you're not interested in studying something. You could do so much more than just fix cars." Or when we were with her work friends and she introduced me, she'd say, "This is Jacob, he's a mechanic," with that apologetic tone. I let it slide because, honestly, I didn't care much what her corporate friends thought of me. But then the late arrivals started. At first, she told me she had meetings after hours, important presentations, dinners with clients. I believed her because I didn't know much about that world. But then it was like 3 times a week, then 4. And by the 3rd year of marriage, I basically only saw her on weekends and not even complete ones. I started noticing other things too. Like she was buying more expensive clothes than normal, that she was getting more dolled up for work, that she stopped wearing her wedding ring because, according to her, it bothered her when typing on the computer. Yeah, sure. One night I checked the shared credit card statement and saw several weird charges. Dinners at expensive restaurants at midday, purchases at stores she'd never mentioned, a hotel. Yes, a hotel in our same city. When I asked her, she said it was for a work conference, that her company had paid for the room so attendees could rest between sessions. I wanted to believe her, Really. But something didn't add up. Then Sandra appeared. Sandra worked at the same company as Melissa, in a different department, and it turns out she knew me because I once fixed her husband's car. One day she came to the shop, asked to speak with me privately, and dropped the bomb on me. She said, "Look, Jacob, I don't know if I should. I tell you this, but if it were my husband, I'd want to know. Your wife is telling everyone at the office that you're separated and almost divorced. She's going out with Anthony, the guy from the sales department, and apparently they've been together for months." I stood there like an idiot holding a wrench, while Sandra showed me photos that another coworker had accidentally taken at a company happy hour. There was Melissa, with a guy I later learned was Anthony, basically all over him in a booth at the bar. I felt, I don't know, like someone had hit me in the stomach with a hammer. Sandra told me she was really sorry, gave me a quick hug, and left. I finished my shift on autopilot, unable to process anything. That night, Melissa came home late, around 11, and acted completely normal. She asked me how my day was, poured herself a glass of wine, went to shower. I was sitting in the living room thinking whether to confront her or not, and I decided no, not yet. I needed a plan because something told me that if this ended badly, and obviously it was going to end badly, Melissa and her family were going to try to keep everything they could. This is where I did something that to this day, I'm proud of having thought of. I started taking night classes in business administration at the community college in the next town over. Nobody knew. Not even Victoria. I also started saving every piece of evidence I could of Melissa's weird expenses, her messages. She left her phone everywhere because she assumed I was too stupid or trusting to check it. Everything. And at the same time, I kept acting like I didn't know anything. It went on like that for about 6 months. Melissa was coming home later and later. Sometimes she wouldn't come home at all and would say she'd stayed at a friend's house because she'd had too much to drink. Her brother, Trevor, who was always an asshole, started treating me worse too, as if he knew something. He spoke to me with that condescending tone, made comments about my truck, about my clothes. Once, at a family dinner, he said in front of everyone, "It's incredible that Melissa has put up with a mechanic for so long. She deserves someone at her level." I stayed quiet, but inside I was boiling. Meanwhile, my boss at the shop called me in one day to talk. He was about 67 years old already and wanted to retire. He told me, "Jacob, you know this business better than anyone. You've been here since you were 20. I want to offer you to buy the shop." He gave me a fair price. And I had savings because I'd always been careful with my money. Plus, I'd been saving aggressively since I discovered the thing about Melissa. I told him yes, but asked him to keep the transaction secret until everything was signed. He looked at me weird but agreed. 2 months later, the shop was officially mine. Nobody knew. The business license was in my name, but I didn't tell anyone. Not Melissa or her family. I kept acting like I was just an employee. Then came the night everything exploded. It was a Friday, around 7 in the evening, and I had decided to leave the shop early to surprise Melissa. Ha! Surprise was what I got. I arrived at the house, and her BMW was in the driveway. Next to an Audi I didn't recognize, I went in through the front door, which we never locked during the day, and heard noises from the second floor. I went up the stairs and there they were, in our bed, Melissa and Anthony. I'm not going to go into details because it still makes me sick to think about it, but let's say there was no way to misinterpret what was happening. Melissa screamed. Anthony jumped out of bed trying to put on his pants, and I simply said, "You have 10 minutes to get out of my house." Melissa tried to explain, cry, say it was a mistake, but I was already fed up. I told them, "Get your stuff, and get out now." Anthony grabbed his clothes and ran out like the coward he was. Melissa started getting hysterical, saying the house was hers too, that I couldn't kick her out like that, and I told her, "Look, Melissa, you can leave nicely or I call the police and show them the photos and messages I have saved." She turned pale, grabbed some things, and left. 10 minutes later, they were banging on the door like crazy. It was Samuel and Trevor. Samuel was yelling that he was a co-signer on the house and that I couldn't kick out Melissa, that he was going to call the police. I had already called the police, actually, and had explained the situation to them. When they arrived, I showed them the evidence of adultery, and they explained that Melissa had no right to stay if I didn't want her to. Samuel was furious, threatened to sue me, to take the house, everything. The officers calmed him down and supervised, while Melissa packed more things. She was crying and screaming. Trevor was insulting me. Samuel was talking to his lawyer on the phone. It was a disaster. The following week, I hired a lawyer. A good one, even though it cost me quite a bit, and filed the divorce papers. Melissa hired the most expensive lawyer she could find, obviously paid for by Samuel. Her lawsuit was ridiculous. She wanted half the house, half my tools, which were worth quite a bit, compensation for having supported me financially during the marriage, which was a lie. I always paid my share, and she even wanted part of my pension from the shop, which technically didn't exist because I was the owner now, but she didn't know that. The first hearing was humiliating. Melissa's lawyer basically painted me as an uneducated guy with no ambition, who had taken advantage of her family's generosity. Samuel testified saying he had made it possible for us to buy the house, that without him, I would have nothing. Trevor said I was a freeloader living off Melissa's salary, which was completely false. Melissa cried on the stand, talking about how she had tried to help me better myself, but I didn't want to study or progress. She said the affair with Anthony had been a mistake, caused by my lack of attention and ambition. Her lawyer asked how much I made as a mechanic, and when I said the amount, about $45,000 a year, he laughed and said, "Your Honor, this man barely makes enough to maintain a house." He clearly needed the financial help of my client and her family. I was sitting there, clenching my fists. My lawyer touched my arm to calm me down. The judge, Judge Cooper, a man about 60 years old with a no-nonsense face, listened to everything without showing much emotion. At the end of the hearing, he said he would review the documents and that we'd see each other in 2 weeks for the final hearing. Melissa left there smiling, hugged Samuel. I even saw that Anthony was waiting for her outside. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. My lawyer told me I had to reveal that I owned the shop, that there was no way to avoid it, but that it played in our favor. He also told me we had to show that I had refinanced the house 6 months earlier, taking Samuel off as co-signer without anyone noticing. I had done that after buying the shop, when my credit improved with the business in my name, but I kept it secret, waiting for exactly this situation. The final hearing arrived and the room was packed. Melissa, her family, some of her coworkers who I guess came to support her. Victoria was there with me. Same as Sandra, who offered to testify if necessary. Melissa's lawyer started repeating the same arguments. That I was a simple mechanic with no future. That Melissa deserved compensation for having endured the marriage. That her family had made our house possible. Then came my lawyer's turn. My lawyer stood up, smiled a little, and said, "Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence that completely changes the financial picture of this case." He proceeded to explain that I wasn't just an employee mechanic, but that I owned the shop where I worked, that the purchase had been made 8 months ago, and that the business was valued at approximately $850,000, according to the appraisal we submitted. Melissa's lawyer turned pale. Melissa looked confused. Samuel stood up from his seat, and the judge told him to sit down. But that wasn't all. My lawyer then explained that the house had been refinanced 6 months ago, that Samuel was no longer a co-signer, that the loan was completely in my name, and that therefore Samuel had no legal claim on the property. He showed all the documents, everything legal and notarized. Samuel started yelling that this was fraud. How was it possible that I had done that? Without telling him. The judge told him to shut up, or they'd remove him from the room. Then came the evidence of adultery. My lawyer showed messages, photos, account statements with the expenses at hotels and restaurants, everything. He showed that Melissa had been telling her coworkers we were separated when it was a lie, that she had brought Anthony to our house multiple times, that she had basically been living a double life for almost a year. Melissa's lawyer tried to argue that this wasn't relevant to the division of assets, but the judge told him that in this state, adultery does affect those decisions. Judge Cooper took like 15 minutes to review everything. The silence in that room was incredible. Finally, he spoke. He said it was clear that the marriage had ended because of Melissa's infidelity, that my finances and ownership of the business were completely legal and obtained with my own work, that the house was mine because I had refinanced appropriately and was the one paying the mortgage. He ruled that Melissa had no right to anything from the business, nothing from the house, and that she would only receive 3 months of temporary support while she got her own housing, like $1,200 a month. Also, she would have to pay her own legal costs. Melissa broke down right there. Samuel was yelling that this was unfair, that he had put his signature on that house. The judge patiently explained to him that he had been legally removed from the loan and no longer had any rights. Trevor tried to approach me after it was all over, but 2 security guards stopped him. Melissa's lawyer asked to appeal, but the judge said the decision was final, that all procedures had been legal and the evidence was clear. I left that room feeling, I don't know, like I could breathe for the first time in years. Victoria hugged me. Sandra was crying with happiness for me. I just wanted to go home, my home that was now completely mine, and sleep for a week. But the story doesn't end there. About 2 weeks later, I found out through Sandra that Anthony had been demoted at the company. Apparently, when HR found out about the affair, and that it had happened partially during work hours and using company resources, like having lied about conferences, they transferred him to an office in another state. Anthony didn't want to go and quit. And surprise, as soon as he didn't have his corporate job and realized that Melissa didn't have the money he thought she had, he left her. He simply stopped answering her calls. Melissa had to move to a small apartment on the other side of town, and according to Sandra, she eventually lost her job because everyone in the office knew what had happened and her reputation was destroyed. Samuel also had consequences. Turns out several of his real estate clients found out about the legal drama, about how he had tried to claim a house that was no longer legally his, and his professional reputation went down the drain. He lost some important contracts. Trevor? Well, Trevor is still an asshole, but now he doesn't talk to me, which is perfect for me. As for me, the shop has been doing incredibly well. I hired 2 more mechanics, implemented some of the things I learned in those administration classes, and last year profits increased by 40%. In fact, I'm in the process of opening a second location on the other side of town. I completely remodeled the house, took out everything that reminded me of Melissa, painted it, bought new furniture. It's really my space now. Victoria tells me I should start dating someone, but honestly, I'm not ready yet. I feel good alone, focused on my business, on myself. Sandra and her husband invite me to dinner often. I've reconnected with friends I had neglected during the marriage. Life is, I don't know, simpler now, more honest. Last week I saw Melissa. I was driving through town and she passed by my house. I was outside washing my truck. Well, now I have a new one, a 2024 Ford F-250. She was in an old Toyota. I guess she had to sell the BMW. She saw me, slowed down as if she was going to stop, but I just kept washing my truck as if I hadn't seen her. She kept driving. I didn't feel anything, not anger or satisfaction or pity. I just felt, good thing that's over. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier, if I was naive or blind. But then I think everything happened the way it had to happen. If she hadn't been so obvious with her affair, if she hadn't been so cruel with her comments about my work, maybe I would have stayed in that unhappy marriage without realizing I deserved better. In a way, she did me a favor by showing me who she really was before we had kids or were more financially entangled. What surprises me most is how people assume things based on appearances. Because I smelled like motor oil and had grease under my nails, Melissa and her family assumed I was stupid, that I had no ambition, that I was inferior. It never occurred to them that someone could be happy doing manual work, that work could be lucrative, that I could be smarter than they thought. That was their big mistake, and in the end it cost them everything they thought they were going to get from me. The other day a new customer came to the shop, a corporate lawyer with a Mercedes. While I was checking his car, he asked me if I was the owner of the place. I told him yes. He asked how long I'd been in the business, and I told him the short version, that I'd worked there since I was 20 and bought it about 2 years ago. He said it was impressive, that most people my age don't have that level of financial stability or their own business. I just smiled and told him, Hard work pays off in the end, I guess. He nodded, paid his bill, and left. Simple things like that remind me that I made the right decisions, that building something with my own hands is worth more than any college degree or office job that never interested me. I don't know what will happen to Melissa in the future. Honestly, I don't care. I heard she's working at a smaller company now, in a much less important position than what she had. Samuel is still in his real estate business, but he's not as successful as before. Trevor. Well, I don't know or care what Trevor does. My life moved forward without any of them, and every day I wake up grateful that that hearing turned out the way it did. There are nights when I sit on the porch of my house, have a beer, and just look at the neighborhood. It's quiet. The mortgage is in my name. The walls are painted in the colors I chose. There's nobody telling me I should be someone different. And I think, this is all I need. A roof over my head that's completely mine. A business that prospers because I put dedication into it. And the peace of mind of knowing nobody is lying to me or using me. That, for me, is worth more than any fake marriage or toxic in-laws. In the end, I learned that people are going to underestimate you based on what they see superficially, but that's their problem, not yours. I kept working hard, planning in silence, and when it came time to show my cards, I did it in the most satisfying way possible. I don't need validation from people who see me as inferior. I need the satisfaction of knowing I built something real with my own effort and that nobody can take it away from me. And that's exactly what I have now.